What is going on, everybody? While going through GoW Ragnarok main story, you will encounter 18 bosses, excluding Gryla. In this video, I will be ranking those. This is not a difficulty ranking. I will be considering how well the boss is placed in the story, how well it reflects the character, if it's applicable, how visually pleasing it is the fight, and how well fight is designed. Without further ado, let's start. At the rock bottom comes Forest Ancient. I can't say a single good word about this fight. It's a gimmick boss that came from a previous game. I never was a fan of it in the previous game, but at least it could get credit for being different, but none when it does get copied over. Ads in the fight just makes it annoying rather than hard, and to be honest, I don't even feel like it is a boss fight. It's probably the worst thing you can say about any boss fight. I honestly forgot this thing exists. I also can't see any reason why it should be there, because we just fought Vanadis and we are about to fight Fiske. The gap between those is not that big, so it has to be filled with something, and both are very solid boss fights, what makes this fight looks even more pathetic in comparison. Let's not waste much time on it and move on. Oh crap, now we have two of those dudes. Double the fun, I guess. Absolutely every single complaint I had about the previous fight is valid for this one. Copy-pasted gimmick boss from previous game, never been very interesting, doesn't feel like a boss fight at all, placed right between marginally better fights where the gap between doesn't need to be filled unless you have something really good. The only reason why this fight is one place higher is that Kratos gets the spear by then, so we can feel the value of power of Draupnir. But to be honest, if this fight was not there, for me the game would be just better. Number 16, Alva. Boss at the end of the Alfheim quest. This boss was dropping through my charts a lot. Initially I was thinking it was kinda in the middle, but as you can see it ended up third to last. Let's start from good stuff. It's very well placed. We had quite a decent gap between bosses in the story. We also needed a finale to the Alfheim arc. Alva also looks good in my opinion, but I'm afraid this is it as good part goes. This boss suffers from the common design flaw in this game where bosses rely on running away from you to regroup and retaliate. And this boss is taking it to a very high level, and because it's quite early in the game you don't have tools yet to follow up properly. So we are stuck here with this weird combat flow, very few openings and a lot of chasing. The better I was getting in the game, the more and more I was hating this fight. The worst part of it, I don't understand why. For some of the bosses this behavior could be justifiable, but against dual-wielding enemy I expected fast-paced combat where you exchange hits and parries. Unfortunately didn't happen. Number 15, Huntress. Just to be clear, I'm talking here only about the boss fight in the first chapter of the game, not all other versions of the boss. This boss is also doing a lot of hit and run, but unlike with Alva, it is kinda justifiable by the visual design of the boss. Weak point on horns is a nice thing to add. I think placement is kinda okay. We didn't need it there from a story perspective and we were just out of a big fight with Thor, but it is a new boss design so it doesn't really hurt. My biggest complaints about this boss are not very big pull of melee attacks, but most important, why? Why do we have to have this fight while I don't have my shield? I love my shield. Could this fight be placed somewhere where I do have a shield? Yeah, I love block and parry, so it's a massive letdown for me. Thus, the 15th place. At 14th place comes Frost Phantom. Phantoms are gimmick bosses of this game, where you have to attack the core before it's stunned, and while it is stunned, destroy springs that support it. This idea makes it a nice environmental boss where you need to search for springs to kill it. and you have to do it under time constraints. Overall, this idea may be used to place strings in all weird places. Unfortunately, because Frost Phantom was supposed to be an introduction to this concept, in theory you can kill side 1 in Alfheim before, it has only 2 springs and both of them are in plain sight, which diminishes the fun of this boss. Also, boss has a mechanic where you can stagger Phantom for an opening if you hit core when it glows. And cool part, it glows right before attacks or even between attacks in a single move, creating an opportunity to high risk, high reward strategy. All I can say, Phantom is a massive improvement over Ancient. The more I played and the more experience I got with the game, the more I realized how disappointing this fight is from a mechanic perspective. Again, it resembles a common flaw of many bosses in this game, hit and run design. When you go super aggressive on Thor in this fight, the more he starts to run from you and use his ranged attacks more and more often. Then he floods the battlefield with his electrocuring paddles, rendering the fight more annoying than challenging. I swear, out of all my failures on no damage attempts on this fight, 90% were just accidentally stepping in the stupid lightning areas. I mean, come on, it is Thor. Have you seen this guy? Do you remember how he was tossing Kratos around like nothing? I understand when old crusty motherfucker like Odin trying not to engage in close combat, but Thor, why are you doing this, game? What makes all I said even more disappointing is that, in my opinion, every other aspect of this first part of Finale Battle is absolutely perfect. We have this insight about Thor and his family through the game, his loving daughter and wife who needs him to be better, his abusive father having no faith in his own son beyond drinking and smashing. We don't want this fight, but yet it comes out of nowhere. Thor is not messing with Kratos anymore, he's angry, he doesn't want to listen. Those short QTEs and cutscenes in the middle of the fight underscores the Thor's anger. And in the end, Kratos wins not by taking Thor's head, but by opening Thor's eyes. The real feeling of victory that doesn't last long. Emotional weight of this fight is massive. It is so sad that it is so undermined by its mechanics. And we're back to minor bosses. There are multiple duo Dreki fights in the game, but it is the only one you will encounter during the main story. Also, if you beeline the story, this is going to be your very first duo fight. It is perfectly placed after we bring the moon back so the gap between bosses doesn't grow too big. It has a very good base in the form of the Dreki itself, which is, as you may guess, I rated even higher, but most importantly, it shows the design of duo fights in this game. In most of the games, I hate duo fights because of how unfair those fights feel. Usually duo fights are just two enemies thrown in the same arena without any changes, and because there is no synchronization between two, they can create a chain of attacks that can't be possibly avoided. So the only way to reliably fight those is to split the enemies up. Not in Ragnarok. In Ragnarok, duo fights are duo fights. They're purposefully designed as duo fights. Almost never will you encounter a situation where two attacks chain in a way you can't avoid those. One of the enemies can back off and stay in fire support role, making the other one scarier. You still have to maintain awareness of both, but you have more freedom of fight with the other. All of it said, in case with Dreki, the concept introduced by the game duo fight design are not put to their maximum there, and those pedals flooding arena in excess from two Drekis undermines the absolutely great mechanics of a single Dreki fight. And at 11th place, I have Bjorn. Bjorn is the first boss encountered in the game. It served the role of introduction boss pretty well, better than Thrall in the previous game in my opinion. It has quite a poor move pool, but that is what is expected from it. It introduces the player to a rage mechanic and sets the story hook for Atreus' shape-shifting aspect. Can't say much more, solid intro, let's move on. Flame Phantom is encountered during the last hour of the story before Ragnarok begins. This section is a bit flooded with bosses. We fight Phantom, then Soul Eater Duo, then Christian Mist back to back. But if any, I would get rid of Soul Eaters rather than Phantom. The reason why this one is so much higher than the Frost is more creative placement of springs, where one is hidden behind a destructible wall, and that we have a spear that makes this fight almost trivial. Just stick a couple of spears into the core and press the triangle when it starts glowing, and it will be stunned. It could be bad for some of the bosses, but feeling powerful against the generic bosses closer to the end of the game makes a lot of sense. 9th place, middle of the pack, comes you got me, Captain Fiske. Fiske is fun mini boss you encounter in the middle of the Reckoning quest. He is fairly aggressive, and for mini boss he actually packs a pretty solid arsenal of moves. He has fast pokes, slower swings, delayed block breakers, 2 types of unblockables, and even a blue ring attack. He can chain those in many different ways that always keeps you focused. He even applies quite a solid amount of Bifrost to make things even more spicy. Even as just a mini boss, his placement is actually meaningful. He's not a random creature living in those lands. He is a captain of Odin forces. His presence emphasizes the hold of the Asgard over Vanaheim. My biggest complaints about him are quite odd timings and odd registration on poke attacks, weird claustrophobic arena, and the stand mechanic. I still don't understand what drives devs to introduce an enemy who can be stun grabbed only once. If anyone has a good idea about it, please let me know in the comments. We are halfway through the video, and if you are still watching, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps a lot, and there is more interesting stuff in development. Back to the list, in the 8th place comes the man himself, the villain, the mastermind, the manipulator, the very annoying boss. I know I bitched a lot about bosses running away, and I will be. It is a common boss problem in this game, and it has to be acknowledged. And Odin brings it to absolutely new level in his 2nd phase. You just keep running after this guy the entire fight. He has more ranged attacks than melee, he can teleport away, he can cast the shield and throw you away, he also pissing the entire arena with those stupid paddles, and don't even get me started on an extremely lengthy cutscene between phases. I know it carries a lot of context, but couldn't it be shorter? Could be it put in something more action-packed? And a tip, if you want to do all story bosses no damage, don't. Not till we get the ability to skip cutscenes. I know every dialogue word to word in this one now. It is horrendous. Then, why did I put this fight so high? First of all, Odin's desire not to engage in close combat with Kratos is more than justifiable. Kratos probably can snap this crusty motherfucker in half. Odin being annoying as he is makes total sense. On top of that, he doesn't have a lot of HP, and if you came prepared for this fight, it won't take you long even on give me God of War difficulty. But the main reason I place it fairly high is how I think it fits into the story. Odin just killed his own son in front of us, he killed our boy Brock before, we are done with it. And then there's dynamic between phases, Atreus has important decision to make, and after Mask is broken, Odin completely changes. He has nothing to lose. To sum up, it is not a very fun fight, but it emphasizes the feelings story created. So for this, I give it a solid 8th place. And from story fights back to fun fights. Dreki is by far my favorite mini-boss in this game. It is well placed, so we don't start missing bosses between Huntress and Alva. It looks cool, it has fairly simple arsenal, but it works pretty well. Dreki surprisingly doesn't suffer from this hit and run issue as much as other bosses. Yes, it goes away from you sometimes, but usually he gets back really fast. Instead of this, he actively exchanges attacks with you. This fight is so rewarding. The better you become at the game, the more fast-paced and fun this simple combat becomes. It is basic but very well designed fight. Vanadis, aka Freya, takes 6th place. I really like how this fight is set. It comes from nowhere and breaks Atreus and Kratos' argument. It is mechanically rich with different moves. Balance between close and range combat is pretty good. She falls back sometimes, but not for too long. It makes you wonder, who is this Valkyrie? It probably won't be a problem to figure out if you're just watching, but because I was engaged in the fight, my brain was not able to focus on that question. Quick sum up. It's a great fight, very memorable, decent mechanics, important for the story, and has an impactful payoff in the end. When I saw Nihog, I was like, shit, huge boss fight. Here comes the shitty camera problems. In general, I hate fighting dragons or other large bosses. Whatever game it is, the camera is killing me. In Dark Souls 3, when I was fighting Nameless King, the problem for me was faced with Dragon, not the second one. That's how much I usually hate the huge boss fights. But then I experienced this. Santa Monica Studios, kudos. This fight feels big but removes all of the inconveniences. It is also mechanically rich with 3 distinct phases, pack all sorts of attack, blockable, parryable, unblockable area, blue rings attacks, you name it. Cutscenes between phases are short and action-packed. This is how mid-fight cutscenes should be done. Immersive, feels like part of the fight. Doing the fight, no damage, no checkpoints was a pure joy. Every time phase changes and cutscene rolls, I was like, yeah, that looks sick. It is also an impactful fight for the story. It gives insights about how Odin operates, how he uses others to achieve his own goals. It shows how Freya not playing Odin games anymore and willing to give everything for her freedom. So yeah, we're absolutely in top tier territory right now. The fights I will remember for a long time. Oh, Heimdall. The guy we love to hate from the moment we met him. Arrogant, disrespectful, always displays his superiority. None of it would work if this feeling of superiority was baseless. We know he is actually dangerous because of stories of him and because of his encounters with Atreus, where Atreus couldn't land a single hit, but this just makes us want to beat his ass even more. And gosh, cutscenes in this fight feels good thanks to this build-up. How he gets scared when you punch him in the face first time. How he calls it was all luck and disbelief and then you blow his hand off. How you smash his bloody face into the ground and finally there is no glow in his eyes. And a moment later you realize, what have you done? You started Ragnarok. You know what also great? That fight mechanics are actually supporting all of this pretty well. After you kill Gulltoppr, you start the phase where you can hit Heimdall. He's very calm and avoiding your every attack, so you need to work around it carefully with Spear. After you punch him in the face, his anger grows in fear. He acts more careless and you have the actual opening when you can hit him. And then the last phase, every time he is staying still, he won't be dodging at all. You actually can hit him every time. That's why last phase feels faster than the previous one. His foresight is gone, and all left is desperation. Beautiful fight that reinforces story and characters really, really well. Well-deserved 4th place. We're finally getting into top 3. The worst thing about the first Thor encounter is the expectation it set for finale, because those expectations unfortunately were not met. But this fight by itself has an amazing design from so many perspectives. It drops on you like thunder on sunny day, pun intended. In this fight, Thor is absolute force of nature, toying with Kratos. Action-packed cutscenes feel like part of the fight and do not irritate at all. Lots of interactable phrases from Thor makes it also fun. He calls you coward if you try to recall the axe in phase 1, or when you try to input move that you didn't learn yet, he says,
"Look at you, trying to remember your old move."
He mocks you when you throw axe into him too much or when you exiting rage. It is a very, very welcome addition to the fight, and it makes it more fun. Mechanically, the fight is not very rich. Thor has only a couple of attacks, but that is understandable. It is the second boss in the game. But now, comparing side by side with the second encounter, it feels like it actually made this fight better. During the first encounter, you continually exchange punches with Thor instead of chasing him. Fight has great dynamic and is extremely rewarding if you manage to play clean and aggressive. So yeah, the first Thor encounter blew my mind when I played the game first time, and it absolutely deserves very high third place in my list. And second place goes to Valkyrie duo Hrist and Mist. I was hyped about this fight the moment I saw it in trailers, but I also was concerned. I remember how tough the Valkyrie were in the previous game, and in general I hated duo fights. That could be an absolute disaster of a fight. Well, good news, it ended up being one of the best. Hrist and Mist are taking GoW Ragnarok duo fight design solution and put it to its best. Two enemies are actually synced, and while creating pressure from multiple angles, require player manage battlefield better and create a better awareness, they will never create an unfair chain of attacks that physically can't be countered. Fight also happens in long but narrow arena. It is very, very important for duo fights because it gives more control over the battlefield for the player. If the arena was round, it is too easy to end up in a situation where enemies are not fitting in already narrow GoW Ragnarok camera, no matter what you do. With an arena shaped like this, in this fight, you can manage to have both Valkyries on the same side and fitting in your screen most of the time. Hrist and Mist has distinct moves. Those moves are familiar but different. Some of them will later be found in Fight, but what is very important, they have moves where they cooperate with each other. Overall, Fight is mechanically rich and has a lot to offer. Different types of blockables and unblockables attacks, delayed block breaker to test your parry timings, different types of range throws, all good stuff. On top of being mechanically amazing, while not carrying as much of emotional value as some other fights, there was still some decent build up for this one, not only in game but in trailers as well. It looks absolutely amazing, and the ending. It may come across as a bit too cheesy for some people, but personally I don't care. I had goosebumps. And the top spot in my list is Garm. In my opinion, developers absolutely mastered big bosses. It feels big, but for the majority of the fight, Garm fits into your screen, attacking from distance. But when attacks lands, you stay in front of ginormous wolf's head, which occupies the entire screen and creates the claustrophobic feeling. At the same time, the fight is incredibly rich mechanically, attacks that you have to parry in sequence, delayed block breaker attacks, unblockable range attacks, massive blockable ground slams, you throw rocks, freeze chains, and hit with points. Damn, you have this Uncharted-esque escape sequence in between fights. It looks epic, it plays epic, it feels epic. Even more so, this is not just a random giant doggo fight. Garm is a key element that sent Atreus back home, and in the process of the fight, it serves as the grounds for rebuilding the relationship between father and son. We see how Atreus shows respect to Kratos' goals, despite the difference of opinions. We see how Kratos shows more faith in Atreus' judgment and overcoming his overprotective parental instincts. Seeing this moment of trust during the second part of the fight hit me really hard. I would go as far and say this boss fight is essential for the character dynamic. Having Kratos and Atreus just reunited without this fight would undermine the story massively. This fight is absolutely incredible in my opinion from all perspectives. Mechanically, visually, emotionally, and in my eyes, it makes an absolute winner.